That one glorious word represents more than just the geography between the Sabine and the Rio Grande. It represents a unique idea and way of life. A life of rugged individualism, proud self-reliance, gritty toughness, and fierce independence. That is what made Texas, and that is what will save her again. Howdy, folks. Sam Houston here. I want to thank you for tuning into the Feed Bandit podcast. Feed Bandit is the Texas first outdoors brand built by rabid Texans, for rabid Texans, and all those who aim to be one someday. We unapologetically promote the ideals that shape our Texas pride and Texas first patriotism through our love of hunting, the outdoors, and the gear and apparel we create. Texas, above all else, preserve the tradition, protect the legacy. Check us out at feedbandit.com. And to repeat that great rallying cry from a former colleague of mine, liberty or death. Now, enough of my talking. Here are a couple of bandits that love Texas as much as I do. Enjoy.
Well, howdy folks, welcome back to the Feed Bandit podcast. Jimmy back with you. On this one, we're going to continue our series about Leave the Swamp. This one, we've been discussing TEXIT and going through the book called TEXIT of the same name by Daniel Miller. Why are we doing this? Well, obviously we started this series before the election in November. I guess what happened then was hopefully a positive thing. At Feed Bandit here, we're cautiously optimistic with what will come of it. However, we do understand the limitations of what any one man can do, and we've seen in the past and had our hopes dashed by how much that one man can actually, hold back the powers of the federal government, hold back the Washington from, strip mining our beloved state of Texas. So, while we're cautiously optimistic of what's going to happen, it's always good to still have a plan B and look towards, if things don't happen, things don't actually turn around, what do we need to do? Well, this Leave the Swamp series goes over that. It goes over what we believe the end game is for Texas. And this book is so far doing a pretty good outline of what that would look like and the reasons why. So without further ado, let's jump back into TEXIT. Okay, where we left off was in Chapter 3, entitled Causes Which Impel Them. That's Chapter 3 of the book TEXIT. And this section is called America the Irredeemable. There are those who believe that Texas should stick it out and work to fix the federal government. Like small children who weep and wail at the suggestion of throwing out the remaining tatters of their safety blanket, they offer solutions that ignore reality. It is a reality expressed by author George Orwell. Quote, "A society becomes totalitarian when its structure becomes flagrantly artificial. That is, when its ruling class has lost its function but succeeds in clinging to power by force or fraud." In 2011, Texas State Representative David Simpson, one of the biggest proponents of personal liberty to ever grace the halls of the Texas Capitol, attempted to push back against unconstitutional airport searches by the Transportation Safety Administration, which he filed House Bill 1937. Simpson's bill would have made it a crime for TSA agents to conduct invasive searches during airport security screenings. That includes humiliating strip searches where TSA agents have been known to thoroughly examine the genitalia. And as an aside, I'm sure everyone listening to this has been sexually assaulted by the TSA. And the other day I saw this genius shirt that folks were wearing and posting as I went through the TSA called, where I had a picture of the person standing there with their arms out and the TSA agent kneeling down and, of course, groping them. And the words on it said, "It's not gay if it's TSA." Absolutely hilarious. But I continue. The bill, which would have criminalized intentionally, knowingly, or recklessly touching the anus, sexual organ, buttocks, or breast of another person, including touching through clothing, or touching the other person in a manner that would be offensive to a reasonable person. It became publicly known as the Anti-Groping Bill. If an average person performed these acts, they would be classified as sexual assaults, and the perpetrator would spend a significant amount of time in prison. However, slap a badge and a uniform on the perpetrators, and I would say call it a costume instead of a uniform, give them federal authority, claim that it's in the interest of national security, and it becomes perfectly legal. HB 1937 passed the Texas House and was sent on to the Senate. The bill had serious momentum until the federal government responded to its passage in the House by threatening to end all air travel in Texas if it passed. As if the federal government had that kind of power. Why, oh why, didn't we have a governor with a spine at that moment to stand up and say, okay, federal government, you know what, we're going to pass this thing. I'm going to sign it. I dare you to try to stop air travel in Texas. And see what they would do. What would they do? Like activate the military from one of the bases here to go blockade some of the airports? In my opinion, that would be basically, per the U.S. Constitution, waging war against the states is treason. So it's a crime. So that would be pretty good definition of waging war against the states, in my opinion. So I say bring it. Call their bluff. That's all the federal government does is bluff. What they do is they rely on the states to enforce their laws, basically. Would have been nice to have seen that little thing, challenged and bluff called and, seen what would happen. But anyway, I digress. As TSA officials lobbied Texas senators and public threats from the Obama administration became more robust, the Senate sponsor, Dan Patrick, withdrew the bill with a parting shot at the wavering senators, and then Lieutenant Governor David Dewhurst. There was a time in this state, there was a time in our history where we stood up to the federal government and we did not cower to rules and policies that invaded the privacy of Texans. I want to know why did he withdraw it? He should have just kept pushing it. Anyway, in an interview with the Texas Tribune, Patrick went on to say, "Our country is saying there's too much federal government in our lives. And this was a chance for Texas to take the lead and probably change the policy of TSA. Because does anyone think that they're really going to close down all the airports tomorrow?" Yeah, there's my point. Texas tried to push back and signal to the federal government that it was out of bounds, as it had done on many issues. The federal government doubled down and signaled to Texans that this was the totalitarian future Orwell warned us about. The United States has found a way to further grow the bureaucracy, demand more money, and take more of our fundamental freedom. In short, the United States is becoming, or already is, a police state. In the name of national security, all citizens are now under the watchful eye of federal government surveillance, and they are willing to accept any violation of their fundamental rights, most without a second thought. It is Joseph Stalin's totalitarian utopia. A certain portion of the population of the United States tries to rationalize and excuse this intrusion into our lives. National security is a legitimate concern. However, in the hands of an unaccountable bureaucracy, these rational national security concerns are amplified by naked fear-mongering and transformed into an irrational acceptance of every encroachment on personal liberty and the sovereign rights of each state. That is as much the problem as the intrusion itself. The bureaucracy has grown to the point that it has developed an existence distinct from the union it administers. Some might liken the federal bureaucracy to a fourth branch of the federal government. The federal government is no longer subject to the people who elect representatives. It is an amalgamation of actors who, in the masquerade of a republic, work as part of a single system whose sole purpose is to enlarge the government and enrich themselves. In Philip K. Howard's 2012 article in The Atlantic, he pulled no punches when calling out the federal bureaucracy and the intractable problem with fixing it. Quote, "American government is a deviant subculture. Its leaders stand on soapboxes and polarize the public by pointing fingers while secretly doing the bidding of special interests. Many public employees plod through life with their noses in the rule books, indifferent to the actual needs of the public and unaccountable to anyone. The professionals who interact with government, lawyers and lobbyists, Make sure every issue is viewed through the blinders of a particular interest, not through the broader lens of the common good. Government is almost completely isolated from the public it supposedly serves. The one link that is essential for a functioning democracy, identifiable officials who have responsibility to accomplish public goals, is nowhere to be found. Who's in charge? It's hard to say. The bureaucracy is a kind of Mobius strip of passing the buck. The most powerful force in this subculture is inertia. Things happen a certain way because they happened that way yesterday. Programs are piled upon programs without any effort at coherence. There are 82 separate federal programs, for example, for teacher training. Ancient subsidies from the New Deal are treated as sacred cows. The idea of setting priorities is anathema. Nothing can get taken away because that would offend a special interest. End quote. In fact, the danger posed by the federal bureaucracy has now entered the public consciousness and has been labeled the deep state. If there's one area the deep state excels in, it's in protecting itself from reform. Attempts at reform have been absolute failures. While they may seem to give some short-term appearance at effectiveness and may provide catharsis for a segment of the public that wants to see the federal government fixed, in the long run, it bounces back stronger than ever. And let me just pause here to say this is my fear of a Trump presidency, because the deep state will do everything in its power to prevent the key things that it needs and that it relies on from being changed. Sure, they'll allow, all the weird things on the fringes to be affected or to be changed. Then Trump will be able to claim a lot of wins, and a lot of people will see that and think that he's doing a lot of things. But I'm worried that it's really the important things that are not going to change. And I'm already worried due to some of the appointments that he's made to key cabinet positions and stuff. While some are good, sort of anti-establishment type characters, like Robert F. Kennedy Jr. in the health department, things like that. The key ones, Secretary of State, Secretary of Defense, he's put in dyed-in-the-wool, neocon warmongers that will fight to continue the same idiotic policies that have happened in the past. And it doesn't make sense to me because Trump has good rhetoric against stupid wars, and things of this nature. But why does he put these people in there? He's showing the same signs of bad judgment on people. And I'm almost wondering whether, a deal was made back in 2016 and another one now. It's like, okay, you're in, and we'll keep you alive, but you'll put in the key people we want into these positions, the most important ones, and you can play around with everything else on the edges, So, I don't know. We'll see what happens. It's going to be interesting. Again, Feed Bandit here, we're cautiously optimistic. But we shall see. We shall see. So anyway, continuing. Even the most widespread federal reform effort in recent history, the Tea Party movement, failed to identify the real issue. Clint Steigner, the director at Money Metals Exchange, was watching as the men and women of the Tea Party movement were betrayed. Quote, "We've seen hypocrisy before. The Tea Party movement during the earlier days of the Obama administration pushed for lower taxes and less spending. Smiling Republican incumbents assured constituents they heard the message of the Tea Partiers loud and clearly. But establishment GOP lawmakers went back to Washington and stuck to business as usual." And let me just say, pay attention to that once this new Congress and Trump gets in there. Pay attention to all these establishment Republicans. They are every bit as bad as Democrats. And in fact, I would argue they're worse because they're kind of snakes in the grass that have people fooled thinking, oh, they're Republicans, so they should be, quote unquote conservative and for freedom and this, that, and the other. Oh no, they still vote for all the stupid crap that comes out of there. So you better, but I advise watching out for these snakes in the grass. Where was I? Okay, it turned out Obama was not the only impediment to downsizing the government. It was the Republican congressional majority who enabled every hike in the debt ceiling and ever larger federal budgets. Obama took most of the blame for the massive expansion in government, but Congress funded every penny of it. Much of the impetus behind the Tea Party has since dissipated. In the end, the Tea Parties were betrayed because they placed their faith in a system that could not and would not be able to deliver the reforms they sincerely wanted to see. It was like sending divers to the bottom of the North Atlantic to plug the holes in the hull of the Titanic and then wondering why the ship was still inundated. For their efforts, they were the victims of political persecution by one of the most heinous federal agencies, the Internal Revenue Service. While initially dismissed as a crazy conspiracy theory, it is now an absolute fact that the IRS was used to target conservative Tea Party leaders and organizations, singling them out for extensive audits and investigations. It has further been shown that they were targeted solely for their beliefs and their work to reform the federal system. The Tea Party said that the federal government was out of control, and it responded by showing them exactly how out of control it really is. And I'll say, this book being written, let's see, when was this book written? Second edition, so 2018. This was before any of all the, what they call lawfare things against Trump. I would argue the Tea Party movement kind of evolved into the MAGA movement. And man, once Trump was out of office, you can see all the deep state things going back against Trump and all that stuff. So, it's out of control, completely out of control. When Donald Trump was elected president, the people and individuals who were targets of the IRS persecution rightly believed that when the process began to drain the swamp, quote unquote, Trump would honor his promise to fire IRS Commissioner John Koskinen. After all, while Koskinen's agency was busy persecuting conservatives and reformists, they were also busy rehiring 213 of their employees who had ducked their taxes, been convicted of theft, misused taxpayer data, and even falsified documents. All right, so they're going to rehire over 200 IRS agents that are criminals themselves. Oh, that makes sense. I get, but in a way, you have to have some sort of criminal mentality to even want to be an IRS agent. How could you look yourself in the mirror, truly doing that job, knowing you're completely stealing from your fellow citizens and ruining their lives in a lot of cases? I don't know how you can live with yourself, but anyway, I digress. We pull no punches here at Feed Bandit. For months, House Republicans sought to impeach Koskinen for obstructing a congressional probe into the agency's targeting of the applications for tax-exempt status made by nonprofit Tea Party organizations and conservative-leaning groups. Quote, I don't know why President Trump hasn't fired John Koskinen, since there is evidence the agency is mismanaged, said Peter Flaherty, president of the conservative watchdog organization National Legal and Policy Center. Koskinen is a very typical Washington creature and is very at home in the swamp, Flaherty said in an interview with the Daily Signal. It's a puzzle to me why Trump hasn't acted. Well, he probably didn't act because maybe they held something over him. I don't know. Trump never fired Koskinen. Instead, this very Washington creature was allowed to finish out his term with no repercussions, telling the New York Times, survival is its own reward. That says it all right there. Issues like these, where the federal system shows its true colors, are why fewer people than ever have faith in the federal system. In a February 2017 Gallup poll, they found that, quote, dissatisfaction with the government now clearly leads as the issue Americans see as the most important problem facing the U.S., unquote. An all-state Atlantic Media Heartland Monitor poll in July 2016 found that Americans think the most serious issue facing the country is that the political system in Washington is not working well enough to produce solutions to the nation's problems. And let me just say, the reason for that is because the government is the cause of all problems. You can almost trace back any major or somewhat minor problem, or somewhat major, definitely minor problems, back to government intervention somehow. Government, when it intervenes or creates a regulation or does something of that sort, all it does is create 5 to 10 more other problems that it then has to then it comes back and claims, oh, you know what? See these problems that are out there? You need to give us more power so that we can then solve these problems. Don't look at us. It wasn't our fault. It's the old saying, I think it was by Harry Brown. He said, government is the gangster that comes and breaks your knees and then comes back and gives you crutches and claims, see how good I am. I gave you crutches, so now you can walk. I mean, it's absolutely ridiculous. You can tell I get fired up about some of this stuff. Continuing, though, if you thought this dissatisfaction with the federal system would translate into seeking more local and state-based solutions to issues, you'd be wrong. Another poll, this one from NBC and the Wall Street Journal, found that 57% of respondents believe the federal government, quote, should do more to solve problems. And help people, with less than 40% saying Uncle Sam is already trying to do too many things. The paradox is obvious. In an age of widespread discontent and distrust of government institutions, most Americans still want government institutions to bite off even more than they are currently, inefficiently, and often harmfully chewing. A majority acknowledges that the federal system is terminally disconnected from the people it purports to serve. A minority has faith or trust in the institution, with even fewer believing it can be fixed. Yet a majority want it to do more, grow more, and spend more. Boy, that's a problem. That is a big problem. So how are we in Texas, how do we have any kind of hope of convincing the rest of the country to change its ways? How does Trump have any hope fighting against this deeply entrenched creatures of the swamp? Oh boy, we'll see. Guy Benson gave voice to the frustration of this paradox in an op-ed on townhall.com. The government should deal with it, they say, but don't cut spending on anything, and don't raise taxes on anyone except, quote, the rich, who already pay an unfair burden, according to most Americans. That's the rub. People are almost always going to demand stable or increased spending on most big programs, but also want the debt stabilized, and also don't want to personally pay for a much more expensive government through higher taxes on themselves, unquote. For Texans, restructuring the federal government to, at a minimum, allow Texans to a sliver of self-government and dignity is impossible under the current system. It boils down to simple math. 2/3 of the states benefit from the unequal relationship between Texas and the rest of the Union. Over half of the population of the United States benefits from the federal status quo. The direction and growth of the well-entrenched bureaucracy remains set in the face of elections and partisan power shifts. Even if the composition of Congress truly mattered, Texas has 36 congressmen and 2 senators out of the 535 members of both chambers. We simply do not have the votes within the federal system to protect our interests. Faced with the insurmountable math, some hope that Texans can lead the political equivalent of a spiritual revival, and that somehow the ideas that make Texas great will spread to the rest of the United States in a great awakening that heralds the return to a more perfect union. While it is true that other states may adopt our policies, the majority of states, through generations of conditioning, are ill-prepared to adopt the Texas mindset. In the end, that still doesn't address systemic problems or the political calculus that is at the core of the problems with the Union, nor does it address returning the right of self-government to the people of Texas. This is not the Union that Texans agreed to join in 1845. It is not even the Union our fathers and their fathers knew. It's akin to joining a Christian church and watching it, over time, fundamentally change its doctrine to venerate Lucifer, the Eucharist being substituted for human sacrifice. This is not a doctrinal shift. It is a monstrous mutation. Far from being the idealized land of milk and honey, it has become land of bilking money. The cry of the Texas politician, hawking a book and seeking federal office, is that Texas should lead the way. That presupposes that the people in the other states want a political Moses to lead them to the promised land, and that the promised land is actually where they want to go. Those who want to live as Texans are already voting with their feet as record numbers are relocating to Texas and calling it home. Those who do not are staying put in voting in record numbers for candidates and policies that are increasingly reminiscent of Soviet collectivism. And let me just stop here and say, I certainly hope those who are moving here truly want to live as Texans, and they're not bringing their garbage ideas of government to Texas. Leave those at the doorstep of where you left. Don't bring them across the border here. And if you have neighbors that think that way, well, talk as much as possible to them about these ideas and how Texas is and will be, continue to be, and will be again the greatest republic in the history of the world. And they're lucky to be here, And it's because we don't have and will reject those garbage, leftist policies that have destroyed the place that they came from. Just always never let them forget why they left in the first place, and why they should be also grateful to be here. Continuing, Texans are no longer comfortable with submitting their political will to a people who, they perceive, wouldn't know liberty and good government if it jumped up and bit them in the ass. There is a precedent for this feeling in Texas. The Texas Declaration of Independence from Mexico specifically calls out the other Mexican states for their weakness in the face of Santa Anna's tyranny. Quote, "We appealed to our Mexican brethren for assistance. Our appeal has been made in vain. Though months have elapsed, no sympathetic response has yet been heard from the interior. We are therefore forced to the melancholy conclusion that the Mexican people have acquiesced in the destruction of their liberty, and the substitution, therefore, of a military government. That they are unfit to be free and incapable of self-government." Unquote. Texans firmly believe the rest of America has lost its way and that Texas is more American than America. Everything that America aspired to be, Texas achieved. The personal freedom and economic opportunity envisioned by the founders of the United States is found in Texas to a larger degree than anywhere else in the United States. While Texas is not perfect, we're working on it every single day. We may stumble and lose our way from time to time, but we always return to the path and keep moving forward. There is no fix for the federal government using the federal government because it is the problem. It's akin to saying that the only way to put out a raging fire is to give it more oxygen and fuel. The fact remains that Texas' strength gives us more resilience than most states in the face of the federal onslaught. But no state is invincible, not even Texas. Past is prologue. To put this all in perspective, it's worth looking at the problem from an old set of eyes. In 1836, the founders of the Republic of Texas were also faced with a government from a capital far removed from them, and a system that transformed the federative republic to which they had sworn loyalty into something unrecognizable. On March 2nd of that same year, it's also my daughter's birthday, they drafted and signed the Texas Declaration of Independence. Unfortunately, few people, even in Texas, have read it. In light of what we know about the federal government, it's worth reviewing, not just by Texans, but by everyone struggling to make sense out of TEXIT. It goes, "When a government has ceased to protect the lives, liberty, and property of the people, from whom its legitimate powers are derived, and for the advancement of whose happiness it was instituted, and so far from being a guarantee for the enjoyment of those inestimable and inalienable rights, becomes an instrument in the hands of evil rulers for their oppression, when the federal republican constitution of their country, which they have sworn to support, no longer has a substantial existence, and the whole nature of their government has been forcibly changed without their consent from a restricted federative republic composed of sovereign states to a consolidated central military despotism in which every interest is disregarded but that of the army and the priesthood, both the eternal enemies of civil liberty, the ever-ready minions of power, and the unusual instruments of tyrants. When long after the spirit of the Constitution has departed, moderation is at length so far lost by those in power that even the semblance of freedom is removed, and the forms themselves of the Constitution discontinued. And so far from their petitions and remonstrances being regarded, the agents who bear them are thrown into dungeons, and mercenary armies sent forth to force a new government upon them at the point of the bayonet. When in consequence of such acts of malfeasance and abdication on the part of the government, anarchy prevails, and civil society is dissolved into its original elements. In such a crisis, the first law of nature, the right of self-preservation, the inherent and inalienable rights of the people to appeal to first principles and take their political affairs into their own hands in extreme cases, enjoins it as a right towards themselves and a sacred obligation to their posterity to abolish such government and create another in its stead, calculated to rescue them from impending dangers and to secure their future welfare and happiness. Nations as well as individuals are amenable for their acts to the public opinion of mankind. A statement of a part of our grievances is therefore submitted to an impartial world. In justification of the hazardous but unavoidable step now taken of severing our political connection with the Mexican people and assuming an independent attitude among the nations of the earth. The Mexican government, by its colonization laws, invited and induced the Anglo-American population of Texas to colonize its wilderness under the pledge of faith of a written constitution, that they should continue to enjoy that constitutional liberty and republican government to which they had been habituated in the land of their birth, the United States of America. In this expectation, they have been cruelly disappointed. Inasmuch as the Mexican nation has acquiesced in the late changes made in the government by General Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna, who, having overturned the constitution of his country, now offers us the cruel alternative, either to abandon our homes, acquired by so many privations, or submit to the most intolerable of all tyranny, the combined despotism of the sword and the priesthood. It has sacrificed our welfare to the state of Coahuila, by which our interests have been continually depressed through a jealous and partial course of legislation, carried on at a far distant seat of government, by a hostile majority, in an unknown tongue, and this too, notwithstanding, we have petitioned in the humblest terms for the establishment of a separate state government, and have, in accordance with the provisions of the National Constitution, presented to the General Congress a Republican Constitution, which has, without just cause, been contemptuously rejected. It incarcerated in a dungeon for a long time one of our citizens, for no other cause but a zealous endeavor to procure the acceptance of our Constitution and the establishment of a state government. It has failed and refused to secure on a firm basis the right of trial by jury, that palladium of civil liberty, and only safe guarantee for the life, liberty, and property of the citizen. It has failed to establish any public system of education, although possessed of almost boundless resources, the public domain, and although it is an axiom in political science that unless a people are educated and enlightened, it is idle to expect the continuance of civil liberty, or the capacity for self-government. It has suffered the military commandments stationed among us to exercise arbitrary acts of oppression and tyranny, thus trampling upon the most sacred rights of the citizens, and rendering the military superior to the civil power. It has dissolved by force of arms the state Congress of Coahuila in Texas, and obligated our representatives to fly for their lives from the seat of government, thus depriving us of the fundamental political right of representation. It has demanded the surrender of a number of our citizens and ordered military detachments to seize and carry them into the interior for trial, in contempt of the civil authorities, and in defiance of the laws and the Constitution. It has made political attacks upon our commerce by commissioning foreign desperadoes and authorizing them to seize our vessels and convey the property of our citizens to far distant ports for confiscation. It denies us the right of worshiping the Almighty according to the dictates of our own conscience, by the support of a national religion calculated to promote the temporal interests of its human functionaries, rather than the glory of the true and living God. It has demanded us to deliver up our arms, which are essential to our defense, the rightful property of free men, and formidable only to tyrannical governments. It has invaded our country both by sea and by land, with intent to lay waste our territory and drive us from our homes, and has now a large mercenary army advancing to carry on against us a war of extermination. It has, through its emissaries, incited the merciless savage with the tomahawk and scalping knife to massacre the inhabitants of our defenseless frontiers. It hath, during the whole time of our connection with it, the contemptible sport and victim of successive military revolutions, and hath continually exhibited every characteristic of a weak, corrupt, and tyrannical government. These and other grievances were patiently borne by the people of Texas, until they reached that point at which forbearance ceases to be a virtue. We then took up arms in defense of the national Constitution. We appealed to our Mexican brethren for assistance. Our appeal has been made in vain. Though months have elapsed, no sympathetic response has yet been heard from the interior. We are therefore forced to the melancholy conclusion that the Mexican people have acquiesced in the destruction of their liberty, and the substitution, therefore, of a military government, that they are unfit to be free and incapable of self-government. The necessity of self-preservation, therefore, now decrees our eternal political separation. We therefore, the delegates with the plenary powers of the people of Texas, in solemn convention assembled, appealing to a candid world for the necessities of our condition, do hereby resolve and declare that our political connection with the Mexican nation has forever ended, and that the people of Texas do now constitute a free, sovereign, and independent republic, and are fully invested with all the rights and attributes which properly belong to independent nations. And, conscious of the rectitude of our intentions, we fearlessly and confidently commit the issue to the decision of the supreme arbiter of the destinies of nations. And there you have it, the Texas Declaration of Independence and the end of Chapter 3 of the book TEXIT. Now, if you go back and re-listen or reread the Texas Declaration of Independence, a lot of those clauses, those reasons that they talked about in there actually apply today, clearly apply today to Texas's relationship to Washington, D.C., or Mordor, D.C., as I like to call it. Of course, the ones about the Indians and at least right now, about the army coming in and the sanctioning of pirates and things, those haven't really happened directly, or at least overtly, but it does happen, through, if you think about it, through hyper regulations and things of that nature that prevent us from actually performing the commerce we want to do here. For essentially doing a lot of the economic things that Texans would be happy to do, but are unable to do because the Mordor says you can't do it. So in a way, our property is being confiscated because we're not being allowed to create and achieve it. But there's a lot of things in there that I and obviously Daniel Miller, the author of the book, would argue, I would think, that are occurring today. And I bet you, if I went back in there and rewrote that, not much would be changed, which is a sad commentary of where we are right now. Whether it's a Republican or Democrat in there, doesn't really matter who's in charge or who's president, because the inertia of the state has been to grow and continually take power away from Texas and to just take from Texas, not give anything back, not let her people, live freely to enjoy their own prosperity here. Just think about how much taxes you pay every year. It's just absurd. So with that, I'm going to step away. That's the end of this chapter. This one, I think, hit closer to home a little bit because it's getting to the point of showing us in clear view how what happened in 1836 or leading up to 1836, all of it's happening now, and I would argue even worse. But we're putting up with it here, which is beyond me. But anyway, maybe things will change again. We're cautiously optimistic here at Feed Bandit, so hopefully, things will turn around and all this will be for naught. But I don't know. I'm a realist. I'm a skeptic and a realist, so I like to, at least try to push for some sort of plan B. So that is taking care of yourself first, taking care of your family, and then taking care of things around your city, your county, and of course your state. And don't waste your time with trying to reform Washington, as was proved in Chapter 3 here. So anyway, with that, I will leave you with this episode. And as always, remember, support your local feed store. Thanks again.
Well, I hope the Bandits gave you an interesting episode that either entertained or educated you. Or better yet, both. Hell, I told them this podcasting thing looks harder to do than defeating Santa Anna. So if you would, please help them out by sharing it with all your like-minded friends to help the Bandits get the word out. And don't forget to check us out at feedbandit.com and grab some gear and apparel to support the cause of Texas. Remember, Texas, above all else, preserve the tradition, Protect the legacy. Finally, as I said some time ago on the eve of the great battle, and I vigorously repeat here again, be men. Be free men, that your children may bless their father's name. Well, fellow bandit, until next time.